All good, Robyn?
Okay,
Lovely.
great. Thank you.
We are ready in the studio. Thank you.
Cool. So, welcome to this Dharma talk this evening, everyone, and I'll continue this exploration of natural good feeling in this talk. So, I've been just thinking about these turbulent times that we're living in, and especially if we look at what's currently happening globally. I think a very natural and reasonable response is to feel deep unease and sadness and pain, anger and frustration, sometimes despair. And we might ask the question, how can we live with ease and joy when such deep fractures seemingly separate human from human, community from community? I think helplessness in the face of witnessing all this can really feel overwhelming at times. But I think then this is exactly when the time when we do need the nourishment of natural good feeling, and not in any way to betray the more charged feelings that arise when we watch the world news or read analysis of what's going on, or not in any way either to mask those feelings or to escape from them, but rather by tuning into what the Buddha calls in the Satipatthana unworldly pleasant feeling, this Pali word niramasa, and what I like to call natural good feeling. We can kind of cushion and steady the heart mind so that we can then respond wisely and compassionately to all that we're assailed by day to day. We know whether that's global news or the emotional and psychological tapestries of our daily lives, and in terms of work, family, and social relationships, etc. So, what is this unworldly, pleasant feeling? It's such a mouthful. Um, I don't like it as a term, and yeah, the best I've come up with so far is natural good feeling. But you might have some ideas on that yourselves. And why is this natural good feeling important? So this is what I want to explore here briefly this evening together. So firstly, I'd like to contextualize pleasure and natural good feeling in terms of the early Buddhist teachings and practice. So in this context, there are two wings or vehicles of practice, if you like, that move us towards this goal of nibbana, liberation from all greed, aversion, and delusion. Okay, and so these two wings or vehicles of practice are serenity and insight, and you might know them too, referred to in the later traditions as compassion and wisdom. So many of us feel an affinity, I think, for one or the other of these wings or vehicles. So if, like me, you have a naturally very busy mind, a curious and analytical mind, you might feel an affinity with the wing of insight. And this is where, we dive into the detailed movements of the mind moment to moment, and we get curious about the nature of the heart mind and the nature of reality, the nature of our lived experience. So we might refer to this as practice that deals broadly with the cognitive dimension of experience, how experience works. And then other practitioners among us are more drawn toward the wing of serenity, of tranquility, of cultivating the affective aspects of the practice. So this is where we're calming bodily and mental activity, and we're cultivating the heart qualities of friendliness, compassion, joy, equanimity, etc. And we're resting in meditative concentration, samadhi. And this is what we were touching on this evening in that practice of cultivating this serenity through resting in this natural good feeling. And this is more of what I want to talk about this evening. And then there's the deeper levels of absorption called the jhanic states. So this wing of serenity, we might refer to this as practice that deals broadly with the affective or feeling dimension of experience, how experience feels. And then there are some folks that are all-rounders and they develop both these vehicles simultaneously. But eventually, though, both these wings, insight and serenity, the cognitive and the affective, need to be brought to maturity in order for liberation of the heart-mind to occur. So one of my Dharma friends likes to joke that she's been flying around in circles for years because she's been strengthening the wing of insight for a long time, but she's generally ignored the wing of serenity. Yeah. And I think this really speaks to the wisdom of a mature practitioner who sees the important role that each wing plays in practice. Just to fly straight to our goal of liberation and avoid, going around in circles like my friend, we need two strong wings. Because after all, insight without serenity is dry and brittle. It's without heart. And serenity without insight can be mushy and vague without intelligence, if you like. And so when we come to talk about feeling Vedana in terms of our Satipatthana practice, and generally we do this in terms of noting these three basic feeling tones: pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So this is what we might be most familiar with in our Satipatthana practice when we practice these, four foundations of mindfulness. So an example of this is right now I feel pleasant feeling because I'm sitting here with you all tonight, and yet when I look at my computer screen, there's a slightly unpleasant feeling because I'm kind of disconnected from you somehow, behind this screen. So, this is an example of noting pleasant and unpleasant feeling. And so that sort of comes into the realm of insight. So here we're referring to working with feeling by taking note of simply when each arises, and then we notice what happens with that feeling. We notice the conditionality of feeling. For example, we see when we simply note and not get involved, like I just did then. And then we can see when we get caught up in, for example, a pleasant sensual feeling and wanting sort of gratification in some way from it. We feel a pleasant feeling because we see something in a window, a shop window. We want that new dress, and then we start clinging to the pleasant feeling that arose upon seeing the dress, and so then we become someone wanting something from that feeling. Yeah. So that's what we explore in the sense of insight when we're looking at feeling tone. But one way we can talk about feeling in terms of serenity practice is to do with the nature of feeling tone and how it's categorized as either worldly or unworldly. So that is whether the feeling tone experienced is to do with sense or material pleasure, or whether it is to do with non-sensual or spiritual pleasure, we might say. So when we understand that unworldly pleasant feeling doesn't stimulate any habitual sense desire, only natural good feeling in the body and the heart and the mind, then we can consciously cultivate this natural good feeling as we were doing this evening, and increase it in order to bring serenity, in order to bring tranquility and peace to the heart and the mind, and a sense of this well-being and ease to the body. So I think a beautiful image of this is what we see in any good Buddha statue, where his body is depicted as upright and easeful. Sometimes you see Buddha statues that look very stiff, but a good Buddha statue has this sort of sense of ease in the posture, and his hands are soft in his lap, And importantly, he has a subtle smile on his face. And I think this image is such a powerful teaching in terms of this serenity wing. Because this feeling is that we're cultivating is all about joy and delight and happiness and contentment, however strong or subtle. And this is a huge spectrum that you might have experienced tonight, for example, in the practice. And this joy and contentment and happiness arises as a result of either simply abiding in the present moment, of not being in the grip of any external sense pleasure. And it can also come when we steady attention on a single object of meditation. So, for example, when we follow the breathing in our meditation, sometimes it can feel very pleasurable just to follow the breath and feel the subtle joy of the breath coming and going in the body. Yeah, you might have experienced that. And this is what we call samadhi or concentration, when we feel that joy arising simply because we're cultivating this good feeling in the body, heart and mind, not because we're looking for it externally. And then ultimately, in the experience of liberation, of nibbana, where there's, the heart and mind is released from greed and aversion and delusion, there is apparently this, this feeling of joy and delight and happiness and contentment in the heart and the mind. So this natural good feeling is feeling that's evaluated according to its repercussions. So as the Satipatthana Sutta says, when feeling an unworldly pleasant feeling, one knows I feel an unworldly pleasant feeling. So how do we know when a pleasant feeling is unworldly or not? It's through our continual monitoring that our mindfulness practice provides, that we come to understand what pleasant feeling leads to stimulating wanting and craving, and what pleasant feeling leads towards our long-term inner happiness and contentment. And I think the best example of this is the Buddha to be himself, when he recognized after many years of quite severe ascetic practices that what was missing was simple non-sensual pleasure and compassion and kindness that are also related, to this serenity practice. So you might know and have heard or read the touching story of the young Gautama, the Buddha to be, when he was sitting in the cool shade of the rose apple tree one day as a young boy, and his father was taking part in a ploughing competition or festival nearby. So he came very near to death with these ascetic practices that he'd been doing, and he realized that he was no closer to the liberation from anguish that he knew must be possible. And so Gautama, he recalled this memory of how in that day under the rose apple tree, he'd experienced a deep concentration and a sense of peace and well-being and pleasure that wasn't dependent on any external stimulation or any external situation being a certain way. And it says in the suttas, quite withdrawn from sensuality, withdrawn from unskillful mental qualities, I entered and remained in the first jhana, this rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, accompanied by directed thought and evaluation. So when he recalled this pleasurable experience of his childhood, the Buddha said, why am I afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensuality? It's got nothing to do with unskillful mental qualities. And so one crucial aspect of this story is that it was this recognition of the Buddhas, or the Buddhas to be, is that it was the catalyst for him to turn away from asceticism and return to the vital life of the body, and then to discover a path that included this pleasure, this unworldly pleasure, this natural good feeling. And one of the suttas, in one of the suttas, he says this kind of pleasure should be pursued, it should be developed, it should be cultivated, it should not be feared. So I was pondering this as I was writing this talk, and I think it's quite a practice, I think, in our modern culture to rediscover and then attune our hearts and minds to these subtle joys of pleasure that practice can bring. Because after all, we're so used to looking externally to find, these big grand bursts of pleasure often, that to feel the subtle joy of simply sitting in the present moment and not expecting anything to happen might seem a bit ho-hum or boring, or even too subtle to feel as pleasure. Yeah. And another aspect too, I was considering that if we've lived with or are living with trauma, attuning ourselves to pleasure in the form of joy or kindness or compassion or gratitude might feel somewhat uneasy or threatening. So I think the important thing to note here is that we just start very gently with where we are. So in my own practice, I spent quite a few years when I first came to this tradition developing insight, and really focusing on that wing, on that vehicle of insight. But after some time, I realized I needed the juice of serenity to balance the dryness of straight insight. That insight was opening up for me quite vividly, but I realized it was landing in a heart that was still quite closed and not that malleable, and it was still healing from old trauma. So practice started feeling quite brittle, like there wasn't enough softness or cushioning or resource there in the heart to enable a deep integration of the insight to occur. And I think this is a really important point, because it's only when we integrate the understanding and wisdom of insight into our lives, into our daily actions, that it really becomes truly transformative. So as I was practicing, I knew what was needed was the calm, deep waters of serenity, a settled and collected mind that isn't darting all over the place, which was my habitual tendency, but gathered and unified in the experience of this, just this now. And that doesn't mean it's tight and contracted mind, but it can be quite spacious, but the mind is gathered and unified into one single experience. And this is what we call concentration in English, or samadhi. And the other aspect that I knew was needed was this soft, open, receptive heart. So the settled and collected mind, and then the soft, open, receptive heart. So cultivating any of the beautiful qualities of the human heart really help foster serenity. And these are gratitude, generosity, patience, all of that list, the list of paramis, love and kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. So two practices that I just want to mention here, that I found really helpful in this regard, in terms of establishing serenity, and really allowing natural good feeling into my heart and mind and into my life. And one is sending love to all phenomena. So this is a metta practice, like a loving kindness practice. But like many people, I could never kind of really access some of the traditional loving kindness practices where, you first generate and radiate loving kindness towards yourself, and then for a dear one or a benefactor, and then to, you know, a friend, and then to a neutral person, and then to all beings everywhere. And it felt kind of mechanical to me, that practice. And it was only when I discovered the teachings and practices that the late insight meditation teacher, Rob Berbia, he's an English meditation teacher who's passed on now, and he wrote about these practices of sending love to phenomena. So just, and I'll explain that. So that was one practice that was really quite transformative for me in terms of cultivating serenity, and the other one is gratitude. So on a self retreat, I focused over several days on simply holding the intention of kindness and love towards all phenomena that was arising in my experience. So this informal practice meant, you know, just sending kindness and love towards a painful body sensation, for example, a tight knee, and then to the breathing as it was coming and going, to sounds that were appearing, and to a sticky thought stream. And then when I was walking around, eating, and during other tasks during the day on this retreat, I would simply direct love towards the trees, the rubbish bins, my feet walking, the truck going past on the road nearby, and its driver, and the food in front of me, and the mind contracting, the alarm going off in the dark, and then my resistance to a head cold that was developing while I was on retreat. So it started in very small ways on the cushion, but as I kept allowing it to expand and expand out into all other aspects of my daily life, what happened is that it quickly showed me the profundity, if you like, of cultivating natural good feeling. Kindness and compassion, and I would call it love, just started pouring through me. And I keenly felt how my life was, and it is, hitched to the rest of existence, if you like. How each unique piece of this existence is unfathomable and precious. And I was alive to the mystery and beauty of it all. And then what happened was it allowed me to see, also to really to settle deeply into the practice. It allowed a more profound settling in the body, and probably more surprisingly to me was this malleability of the mind that happened. Because as I was as I continued offering metta, loving kindness to all phenomena as it arose in my experience, I saw how I was putting aside preferences in the mind for this and that, and receiving all in that kind attention equally. And then equanimity could arise. And this was what really provided good conditions for serenity to arise, for tranquility to just arise naturally out of these conditions that had been cultivating. And what happens then is that these conditions that serenity create in practice then naturally set the conditions for further insight to arise. And this is how the two wings of practice work together. And I'll just to finish, I'll just quickly mention the other practice that I still do now daily, and that is of gratitude. So as I get up in the morning and I move into the first part of my day, I just say a very simple prayer of thanks. I give thanks for this, another new day. They are the words that I use. And then I follow that by giving thanks for 3 specific things that I'm grateful for right now. And sometimes that's while I'm out walking my dog in the morning. So it might be, this might be, those things might arrive, like the cheeky magpie I came across this morning, and I just gave thanks for that magpie for its life. So again, what I'm finding and what I have found is the profound nature of this practice lies in this sense of connection to something larger than myself, than just me and my life, my world. And this connection brings juice and nourishment. I like to say it sort of tills the soil of friendliness that carries the seeds of the rest of my days. And so I think it's important that when we come to this practice of serenity, that we don't underestimate the role of this natural good feeling, and how it can really support us in such turbulent times that we're living in. Because when we're nourished and have deep resource within our bodies, hearts and minds, then we can be wise, ethical, compassionate actors in the world, and within our communities, within our families, and beyond. And I think, that can only have positive repercussions for the world. And that image, that beautiful image of the, I'm not sure of the source of it, but the image of the butterfly, fluttering its wings, and the ripples of that, are said to go out into the cosmos. So we don't know what the positive repercussions of our generating and cultivating natural good feeling are and will be in this world. Okay, thank you so much for your generous listening. So let's just sit for a minute or two together, just to let all of those words land.